feels like every other day I wake up to headlines about a major company getting hacked. Airlines, telcos, banks, universities, health insurance providers, the list goes on. Customer data gets stolen and an apologetic email lands in my inbox saying I might want to change my passwords. That's just life in 2025. Back in the 90s, things were different, but not really. Companies were becoming increasingly aware of the threat of hackers, and they were investing in firewalls and antivirus software. But what they failed to anticipate was that the danger wasn't always coming from outside parties. Sometimes, the call was coming from inside the house. The 1996 Omega engineering case became one of the most infamous insider sabotage stories in US corporate history, causing so much damage that the company never truly recovered. And this perpetrator didn't do it for money, for intel, or for fame. It was pure spite. As the saying goes, some men just want to watch the world burn. Omega lost years of data overnight because their system wasn't protected. Now, while you're probably not guarding millions of dollars worth of engineering projects, your personal data is just as valuable to hackers, trackers, and anyone else looking to exploit your private information. That's where a VPN like today's sponsor, Private Internet Access, comes in. Using the internet without private internet access, you may as well be leaving your phone or laptop unattended at a cafe. A VPN is an app that hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection, protecting your personal data and digital life. With over 30 million downloads, PIA is also the world's most transparent VPN. They'll never record or store your data. With private internet access, you can also change your geolocation and unlock way more content across Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and all the big streaming sites that may not normally be available in your country. Even while doing research for this video, I was looking for the Forensic Files episode about this case. I went to the official YouTube channel and found that the episode wasn't available to me here in Australia. I switched my location to the States and it worked. One private internet access subscription allows you to protect an unlimited number of devices at the same time, and it also works on all platforms: Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, so your entire family can be covered. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. So if you want a massive 83% discount on private internet access, that's just $2.03 a month, plus an extra 4 months completely free. Click on my link in the description, piavpn.com/amglimpse, or scan the QR code on the screen. Now, back to the story. It's 8 a.m. on Wednesday, 31st of July, 1996, at the Omega South manufacturing plant in Bridgeport, New Jersey. A worker clocks in at the Computer Numeric Control Department and sits down at his computer terminal like any other day. Omega Engineering was a company that manufactured high-tech instruments measuring temperature, pressure, flow, and humidity for major clients like NASA and the US Navy. Its manufacturing machines ran on programs stored on an Novell NetWare 3.12 file server, which is an old operating system that no longer exists. The server was like the central brain of Omega. It stored over 1,000 programs and code generators that allowed the company to manufacture 25,000 different products and to customize those basic products into as many as 500,000 different designs. The worker logs in and fires up the server, but instead of the usual boot up, an unusual message pops up on the screen saying the computer is fixing some files on the server. The worker isn't sure what the message means, but figures that a fix must be harmless. But a few seconds later, the computer crashes, as does the entire server. The crash takes down all of the plant's tooling and manufacturing programs. The managers and company execs don't know this yet, but the vital proprietary programs weren't just down, they were completely destroyed with no means of finding or repairing them. Plant manager Jim Ferguson was alerted. Typically, crucial files were periodically copied from the server onto backup tapes, so he immediately went to search for them. Side note, did anyone else have no idea that before floppy disks, computers used to take cassette tapes? The backup tapes were supposed to be kept in 1996's version of cloud storage, which in this case was a filing cabinet in the HR department. But when Ferguson checked there, the tapes were nowhere to be found. Omega was now in crisis mode. Without the server and its programs, the manufacturing company had no means of manufacturing anything and layoffs would be imminent. Ferguson desperately searched individual workstations around the factory, hoping that someone had saved programs locally to their desktop, but nothing. He contacted every data recovery specialist in the area, but none of them could get the server back up or find any of the programs. As a last resort, Ferguson phoned Omega's former network administrator, Tim Lloyd. Lloyd told Ferguson that he had left the backup tapes in his desk drawer at Omega, but Ferguson himself had helped Lloyd clean out his desk. The tapes weren't there. He kept giving Ferguson the runaround, giving vague directions to where the backup tapes might be, and saying he'd check the basement of his home, but then never doing so. Tim Lloyd had worked at Omega for 11 years before he was fired 3 weeks before the crash. He started at the company in 1985 as a 20-year-old machinist. Lloyd rose up through the ranks of the then relatively small company, and he eventually designed and built the entire computer network for Omega's manufacturing plant. He was the only employee who got Novell certification training, and so he became the sole administrator of the company's server. He was promoted to Chief Network Program Designer and became a well-respected and trusted leader in the company. Lloyd managed the server and the network, maintained it, and was responsible for keeping it secure. He handed out passwords, loaded new programs, developed expansions, and he was the only person in charge of performing backups. Lloyd was fired from Omega, but still given a positive recommendation for his strong technical abilities. The company decided not to replace him, as they assumed they could just get an outside contractor to come in and maintain the server every now and again. In the days following the crash, Ferguson kept calling Lloyd over and over. He even went to Lloyd's house to plead for help in person. By now, Lloyd was married with 3 kids and had started a new job closer to his home in Wilmington, Delaware. Lloyd insisted the tapes weren't in his house, and Ferguson had no choice but to head back to Omega empty-handed. Meanwhile, the factory's machines were able to keep producing with whatever programs had been loaded the day before the crash, but eventually they ran out of raw materials and had a large enough inventory of products that the plant had to be shut down and workers were sent home. By logging in that morning, the worker inadvertently pulled the pin out of a digital grenade that would become the most expensive case of computer sabotage in history at the time. The server crash meant Omega could not manufacture its products, and in just a few seconds, the global enterprise had been brought to its knees. Operations coming to a standstill caused the company a loss of over $10 million in sales and contracts. $2 million was spent rebuilding the 1,000 lost manufacturing programs. The crash knocked Omega off its course of 34 years of steady growth and sadly left 80 people without jobs. Plant manager Jim Ferguson would later testify in court, "We will never recover."
I am never going to financially recover from this.
A new statute had recently come into effect that made computer sabotage a federal offense if it affected a computer used in interstate commerce and caused more than $5,000 worth of damage to the company over a 12-month span. That number does feel kind of quaint by today's standards, seeing as $5,000 is about how much you'd pay for a couple of MacBooks. High-tech fraud-related criminal investigations fell under Secret Service jurisdiction, and Omega was beginning to suspect the server crash was deliberate and possibly a criminal act, so the situation was reported to the Secret Service. Special Agent William Hoffman led the months-long investigation, starting by interviewing 50 Omega employees, from execs to shop floor workers. While the Secret Service was tracking down physical evidence, technicians from OnTrack, a data recovery firm based in Minnesota, were hired to work on the data. They had already examined Omega's hard drive and determined that physically it was undamaged, meaning that whatever caused the crash was going to be in the data. An exact digital replica of the hard drive was created, and OnTrack technicians discovered only fragments of unintelligible code, just bits of jumbled up numbers and letters that didn't mean anything. Omega's programs hadn't simply been deleted off the server, they had been purged, meaning they had been destroyed with no way to find them or piece them back together. From early on, it was apparent that this was no accident. It was determined that no virus could have caused this type of damage, and an external attack was ruled out as the server was only connected to local networks. This also wasn't simply user error, only key manufacturing programs were destroyed, and whoever did it knew exactly where those programs were located, meaning this was a deliberate inside job. Early evidence all led to former employee Tim Lloyd. He was the only person with Novell certification training, he had complete access to Omega's computer system, and he was the last one seen with the backup tapes. But he had been fired 3 weeks ago and had no access to the Omega building, let alone its computers. Greg Olson, OnTrack's Director of Worldwide Data Recovery Services, now had the task of carefully combing through the electronic debris left behind on the server. First, he noticed a whole bunch of accounts with generic usernames like 12345 had been created that didn't have passwords, but did have supervisory admin rights. Olson then searched for common deletion commands like delete and purge, and sure enough, there were hits for the term purge. He continued to systematically pull programming strings out of the code wreckage until he had pieced together 6 lines that looked like they could do damage. The first line was the date, the triggering point in the code string, executing the rest of the commands as long as it is after July 30th, 1996. This gave access to the server. This was the login command for the mysterious user 12345. The account had no password, so it could just log straight in, and because it had supervisory rights, it could perform deletions. This line gave access to the public directory, and therefore access to the manufacturing programs. Fix.exe was not a NetWare executable and would not normally be found on a NetWare system, so this was immediately a red flag for Olsen. He discovered that it ran a modified deletion program, modified so that instead of displaying on the screen deleting, it said fixing. That's why on the morning of July 31st, the fixing message popped up on the computer screen. The executable was also rewritten to ignore safeguards and automatically answer yes to the question, "Are you sure you want to delete these items?" And finally, the purge command made all of the deleted information immediately blow up and scatter into millions of random chunks, making recovery impossible. 6 lines of code was all it took to take down a global company in 1996. Olsen likened the code to a time bomb, written so it would detonate on boot up no matter which user logged in. To test and confirm the time bomb, Olsen set up a clone of the Omega server and workstation and set the date prior to July 30th, 1996. And sure enough, nothing happened. But when he changed the date to July 31st, the entire system crashed while pretending it was fixing things. Olsen also found 3 earlier test versions of the code dated February, April, and May 1996, which suggested that whoever had written it had been practicing before unleashing the real attack. On the morning of August 21st, 1996, Agent Hoffman and his team executed a search warrant on Tim Lloyd's home. They seized computers, motherboards, keyboards, more than 500 disks, CD-ROMs, 12 hard drives and tapes, including 2 Omega backup tapes. Both tapes had been formatted, in other words, completely erased, the day before Ferguson visited Lloyd's home. Also found on one of Lloyd's personal hard drives among his family photos was a copy of the 6 lines of code that made up his time bomb. This was enough to show criminal intent, and Lloyd was indicted on the 28th of January 1998. Tim Lloyd's trial began in April 2000. It would be the first ever federal criminal prosecution for computer sabotage. Lloyd pleaded innocent to his 2 charges: intentionally causing irreparable damage to Omega's computer system and stealing about $50,000 worth of computer equipment and taking it across state lines. He was advised by his lawyer not to testify, but he did speak to the press, telling Network World, "There is no way in the world I did this. I had complete access to the mainframe system from home. If I was a vindictive person, do you think I'd go after a teeny tiny little network?" Lloyd even denied being Omega's network admin at all, claiming he was just a machinist, not an IT guy. His defense team's strategy was deflection. They argued that sometimes computers and networks simply just crash, and Omega had done a bad job of managing their systems, failed to maintain backups, and were pinning the disaster on Lloyd to cover up their own incompetence. They suggested the crash might have been caused by an outside hacker, another employee, or a virus. But the prosecution's case was far more concrete. Assistant US Attorney Grady O'Malley laid out the evidence against Lloyd. Firstly, Lloyd had built Omega's network from the ground up and controlled every account and password. Every employee interviewed confirmed he was the one running the system. On July 1st, just a few weeks before the crash, Lloyd had personally checked out the backup tapes from HR but never returned them. Investigators later found one of these tapes during the search of his home, labeled July 1st, 96, and it had been wiped. Then, just days before he was fired, Lloyd had quietly gone around to all of his co-workers' computers and removed any programs that had been saved to desktops, and centralized them all onto the server he was planning to blow up. This is why Ferguson hadn't been able to find any leftover programs saved on any of the workstations. During OnTrack's investigation of the code on the hard drives, test versions were found dating back to days in February, April, and May 1996. Lloyd's work time cards showed that he had worked late on each of those nights, suggesting he had stayed back at work to test out his code. Finally, on the day of the crash, July 31st, 1996, Lloyd had made a chilling remark to a colleague at his new workplace. "Everybody's job at Omega is in jeopardy." It was clear he knew something was going to go down. So what was Lloyd's motive behind planting the time bomb? In the early years of Lloyd's employment at Omega, he was a leader and a star employee respected for his IT expertise. But as the company expanded into a global corporation, Lloyd began to lose clout and his prominent position was reduced to just another team member. His ego was bruised and he began to lash out. Co-workers described him as bitter, combative, and even physically violent. He had once elbowed a female colleague during a disagreement. He clashed with his colleagues and higher-ups, bottlenecked projects he wasn't in charge of, and knowingly allowed defective programs to be loaded to make others look bad. In his final year at Omega, Lloyd had received numerous verbal warnings, was written up twice, and demoted. After 11 years at the company as a trusted veteran, he had completely fallen from grace and was ultimately fired for his behavioral problems. Prosecutors called his scheme an elaborate and Machiavellian plan. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Lloyd was found guilty of computer sabotage, but acquitted of transporting stolen equipment across state lines. In February 2002, at age 39, he was sentenced to 41 months in prison and ordered to pay $2 million in restitution. After the verdict, prosecutor Grady O'Malley declared, "Technology is creeping into the courtroom." Judge William Walls warned, "We need to deter others in this increasingly computerized world and economy." Which was kind of giving...
See, I'm so right to get us on the internet. The internet's going to be massive, I keep telling you.
Yeah, we'll see.
In 2000, CNN reported that industry insiders, quote, hailed the conviction as a precedent-setting victory, proving that the government is capable of tracking down and prosecuting computer crime. Thanks so much for watching this video, and leave a comment if you also feel weirdly nostalgic for the days when the biggest threat to cybersecurity was a disgruntled employee, some tapes, and 6 lines of code, instead of bots and state-sponsored hackers and data breaches and malware and crypto scammers and... Let's just do one of me petting her while I say it. But he did speak to the press telling network